The air inside the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio buzzed with late-night energy. Lights flickered overhead, the crowd murmured with excitement, and stagehands whispered commands through earpieces. It was a typical Thursday night except for one thing. Bradley Whitford, the Emmy-winning actor known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue, sat silently in the green room, staring into the void of his phone screen like he was watching something he couldn't unsee. He had arrived unusually early, offered no jokes to the crew, and ignored the bottled water placed carefully on the table next to him. His eyes didn't blink much. No one dared disturb him. The only sound in his corner was the occasional click of his thumb scrolling. Tonight was supposed to be part of a light media tour for his new docuseries, System Error, a show about how digital media manipulates public perception and how political truths are often manufactured in boardrooms before they're even spoken in parliaments. The show had already stirred controversy, especially among government insiders who accused it of being conspiratorial entertainment. But most viewers dismissed it as just another political actor playing woke. The audience in the studio clapped as Jimmy welcomed his previous guest off stage. Behind the curtain, a producer signaled Bradley to head to the wings. Still without speaking, he pocketed his phone and moved quietly into position. The stage manager whispered, "You're on in 3. The camera lights flared. Jimmy Kimmel beamed. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next guest needs no introduction, Bradley Whitford." Polite applause. Bradley walked out, smiling faintly, shaking hands. He sat, the desk was between them like a diplomatic barrier. For the first few minutes, everything went as expected. Jimmy joked about Bradley's beard. Bradley returned with dry wit. They talked about his dog. The crowd laughed on cue. Then, the topic shifted to the docuseries. So, this show's system errors. "Intense," Jimmy said with his trademark grin. "Are you telling me I've been brainwashed by YouTube thumbnails?" A small chuckle rippled through the audience. Bradley leaned in, calm but precise. "I'm saying we don't know who's writing the script anymore." Jimmy blinked. That sounds dramatic, even for Hollywood. Bradley didn't smile. Well, dramatic things are easier to digest, especially when they're packaged with humor, applause, and familiar faces. The room chilled. A producer in the control room leaned forward. Jimmy cleared his throat. "You're talking about media manipulation, right?" "No, I'm talking about simulations." Now the audience shifted uncomfortably. Jimmy tried to stay light, like the Matrix. "Should I duck now, or—" Bradley interrupted. "The show format we're sitting in these questions. Your tone. Even the breaks and laughter, they've all been modeled, rehearsed, not just for ratings, but for ... reaction calibration." Jimmy squinted. "Come again, I received a simulation file," Bradley said slowly, "from an anonymous source. It showed this interview word for word. It predicted how I'd react, what jokes you'd use to steer away from tension, and how the audience would respond. And most disturbingly, it wasn't prediction, it was orchestration, silence." A red warning blinked in the producer's booth. Someone whispered, "Get him back on track." Jimmy heard it through his earpiece. "Bradley," he said with a nervous smile, "you know I love a good conspiracy, but this is starting to sound like an episode of Black Mirror." Bradley nodded. "That's the genius of it. We dismiss what feels scripted because it's too accurate. But that's how simulations work. They don't need us to believe them. They only need us to absorb." Jimmy forced a laugh. "All right, man, you really are selling this docuseries." But Bradley didn't laugh. He reached under his lapel, removed the wireless mic, and stood up. "I'm not here to sell anything," he said. "This segment was never meant to air." He placed the mic gently on the desk and walked off stage. Gasps echoed from the audience. Jimmy turned to the camera, confused, as the feed suddenly cut to a commercial. Not a smooth transition, just a hard drop to black. 30 seconds later. The hashtag Whitford walkout was trending. People online speculated everything from a mental breakdown to an elaborate PR stunt. But those watching closely had noticed something stranger. The last 10 seconds of Bradley's comments had a slight glitch, like it had been stitched together after the fact. A loop in the crowd noise. A double blink from Jimmy. Too fast. It's almost imperceptible. Clips were replayed. An independent journalist named Gita Lau posted side-by-side comparisons between the aired feed and a leaked backstage rehearsal from earlier that day. The rehearsal had the same jokes, the same laughter, the same awkward glance from Jimmy when Bradley said, "I received a simulation file." But in the rehearsal, Bradley never said that. Gita posted, "How do you rehearse a spontaneous confession?" Meanwhile, ABC's official channel replaced the original segment with a corrected version where Bradley remained composed, laughed at the jokes, and exited graciously. But it was too late. The internet had already seen the moment when fiction cracked. And for the first time in a long while, millions weren't laughing. The next morning, newsrooms across the country scrambled to make sense of what had happened the night before. On paper, it was just another celebrity walking off a talk show. But the video, that raw, glitched, unfinished moment, told a different story. It wasn't just that Bradley Whitford had walked off. It was what he said right before the feed. Cut. And the way the network reacted afterward, that set off alarms in places far beyond entertainment. Gita Lau, an independent investigative journalist with a reputation for catching what others miss, wasn't sleeping. She was reviewing frame-by-frame footage of both the live broadcast and the sanitized version released later. Her apartment was quiet except for the hum of 3 laptops running side by side. On one, she had footage of the walkout. On another, she ran metadata comparisons between rehearsal and live feed timestamps. And on the third, a secure messaging window blinked. A message from an encrypted contact read. They altered the feed in real time. Look at frame 1276. There's a 0.3-second overlay from rehearsal footage. That tech isn't public yet. Zoomed in, they were right. This wasn't just editing. It was live synthetic patching, a government-level capability not available to any media house. Officially, at CNN's morning editorial meeting, a senior producer muttered, "This shouldn't even be possible. How the hell did a talk show trigger a national incident?" Within hours, government spokespeople were issuing vague statements. Bradley Whitford's comments on Jimmy Kimmel Live appeared to be his personal views and are not connected to any classified operations. It was strange that they would even use the phrase classified operations. That's when things escalated. The System Aero official website went offline. Its archive links were scrubbed. Even cached pages failed to load. Bradley's social media accounts were locked, showing messages like, "This profile is temporarily unavailable due to a platform integrity review." But someone else spoke up. A former DC cybersecurity analyst named Amal Reyes posted a chilling video from a parking garage, face partially shadowed. Her voice was tight, rushed. "I don't know what Bradley saw, but I worked on simulation tech for the Department of Behavioral Assessment. We tested public reaction thresholds using synthetic interviews, late-night shows, news panels, even influencer chats. We'd feed simulated narratives, then measure spike curves, anger, disbelief, humor. The Kimmel format was one of our models. I'll be tested to death." She looked over her shoulder. He had a real file, then he didn't walk out because he was angry. He walked out because he realized the simulation was running and we were inside it. The video went viral, 10 million views in 4 hours. At the same time, Kimmel's production team released a formal statement denying any collaboration with federal agencies. But leaks suggested otherwise. A backstage assistant, anonymously quoted by a media outlet, said there were guys in suits in the control booth. Not producers, not crew. They never gave names, just stood there watching. Meanwhile, Gita was contacted again through her encrypted channel. Check the 2019 Black Horizon Symposium files. Look for Segmented Narrative Conditioning, SNC, and Kimmel Matrix Beta. She traced it to an obscure conference in Brussels, a gathering of behavioral scientists, media consultants, and defense strategists. Most records were hidden, behind paywalls or non-disclosure protections, but a single slide deck had leaked years earlier and been forgotten. One page stood out: Project Kimmel Matrix Beta Simulated. Conflict within popular culture formats, narrative drift. Testing in controlled late-night environments, celebrity vessel. Feedback mechanism, CVFM objective. Observe public stability. When confronted with narrative deviations in familiar entertainment spaces, Gita whispered aloud. They were testing the audience, not the guest. But there was still no sign of Bradley Whitford. Until that evening, in a grainy live stream from an anonymous account titled Systemico57, Bradley appeared in what looked like a hotel room. His eyes were bloodshot but clear. Behind him, curtains. Moved with wind, the audio crackled but held. "I'm safe, but not for long," he began. "I've spoken out of turn. They're trying to patch over what happened, but you can't patch truth. You can only delay it." He leaned closer to the screen. "I didn't know about the simulations until 3 days before the Kimmel taping. The White House Communications Office did not release a statement the next morning. That was the first red flag." In a media environment obsessed with instant narratives and message control, silence was a language of its own. Behind the scenes, however, operations had already begun. An encrypted file titled echo_km-7.rpf began circulating within high-level intelligence circles. Its contents weren't immediately disclosed, but the file was flagged as having been copied legally from a Department of Defense neural model environment used for information prediction. Someone had accessed it, someone outside. The metadata matched the timestamp from the day Bradley Whitford visited the production offices of his own documentary 2 days before the Jimmy Kimmel appearance. Back in Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't on air. ABC announced a planned break in programming due to a technical reset. But insiders were leaking that Kimmel had been taken for off-site consultation, a phrase used previously only in cyber-compromised drills. One of the writers described the studio as gutted. Hard drives, video switchers, and even backup rehearsal tapes were gone. Gita Lau, the journalist who'd already gained thousands of followers for her coverage, was now on a flight to Geneva. A cryptic message left at her apartment door had read, "Fly east. 2 will meet you. Trust neither." Truth is triangulated. In the meantime, media personalities who had publicly defended Bradley were being silenced one by one. Podcasts removed. YouTube channels demonetized. Even benign social commentary was flagged for violating broadcast integrity standards. But something was pushing through the digital blackout. Slow leak, methodical, and chilling. It began with a file dump on a hidden channel of a defunct streaming app. It was labeled Kimmel SEG7 Observer Protocol. Only 2 journalists caught it in time. One of them was a freelance war correspondent in Ukraine. The other was a climate data archivist from Oslo. Neither had ever written about politics. Both had received anonymous cryptocurrency wallets minutes before the link dropped. And both claimed the payment was to hold the file for exactly 36 hours, then release. The file contained something horrifying. This was a segment by segment behavioral tracking manual for celebrity interviews, not for the guests, but the audience watching at home. It detailed variables like facial tension range per topic, cross-device echo reaction, and something called trust fall points. Moments when a celebrity makes a statement that causes viewers to either lean in or shut down emotionally. And for Bradley Whitford's segment, the document didn't list possibilities, it listed results. Its predicted outcome: host tension spikes at 3 meters 27s. Subject defies prompt 4x. Live feed exits at optimal shutdown window. T plus 8 MO2S. Net audience dissonance. Peak 6.4 M reactions minute. This wasn't a prediction, 'twas post-analysis. But the interview hadn't aired that long. It was cut around minute 6, unless the real version went longer. Unless we never saw what actually happened. Meanwhile, Gita landed in Geneva. The meeting place was an empty research institute rented under a shell foundation. 2 people were waiting, a woman in her 40s with a subtle NATO badge peeking from under her coat, and a man who didn't speak at all, just passed her a hard drive and typed something on his phone. She read the text, "This isn't America's secret, it started here." The hard drive contained footage, raw, timestamped. It's an uncut of 3 separate late-night interviews from different countries. Russian satirical show where a prominent actress suddenly started quoting anti-surveillance legislation verbatim before being glitched off-screen. A South Korean variety show where a singer broke from script and accused the government of manipulating song popularity through algorithmic propaganda. A BBC political panel where a conservative pundit blanked out mid-sentence and started reciting phrases from a leaked NSA document before the camera cut. None of these incidents were ever aired in full. All had been altered, patched, or written off as technical malfunctions. Gita whispered, "So we've all been in it." The woman nodded. They were never testing individuals. They were testing the thresholds of public disbelief. Gita asked, "Then what did Bradley do that was different?" The woman didn't hesitate. He knew the simulation would respond to him. And he forced it to respond publicly, not just through feedback data, but visibly, on air. Back in the U.S., chatter within federal oversight groups was unraveling. Congress members were privately requesting closed-door sessions. One leaked internal memo warned, "Any narrative breakdown at scale could disrupt national cohesion. Stop further broadcasting of simulation fracture events until assessments are complete." In plain English, no more guests who might say the wrong truth. The networks were complying. Scheduled interviews with artists, whistleblowers, and even academics were being postponed indefinitely. But it was too late. An irreversible momentum had begun. In small random corners of the internet, people were piecing things together. Why certain shows glitched only when sensitive topics came up? Why some faces looked subtly different in replays? Why your phone always buzzed at the exact moment a guest said something too real? And why for a split second after Bradley Whitford stood up, you could see a ripple behind him. Not on the screen, behind the screen. As if the reality itself had flinched. The ripple wasn't a glitch. It was more like a hesitation in reality, like the simulation couldn't keep up. Millions had seen it, and though major networks replayed a cropped version of the segment, slowed-down bootleg clip was already spreading in encrypted Reddit threads and private Telegram groups. In it, for just 2 frames, a set of numbers appeared behind Bradley Whitford as he rose from his chair. The digits weren't part of the studio background or lighting rig. They floated almost holographically behind him. A timestamp, perhaps. Or coordinates. But too precise, too deliberate. 44.5017 N. 11.3408 EZ level. Echo users trace the location to Bologna, Italy, specifically an abandoned NATO signal operations center buried beneath a defunct weather research station. A known Cold War remnant, supposedly empty. Supposedly declassified. Except now, every entry to the area was blocked by private contractors with no country affiliation. No uniforms, no explanation. In Geneva, Gita Lau stared at the frozen coordinates. On her laptop, her fingers trembled slightly. The NATO liaison across the table from her was already on the phone, voice low and clipped. The silent man beside him was reviewing a list of journalists known for tracking cyber espionage, many whom had disappeared in the last 6 months. "What's at Bologna?" Gita asked. The liaison didn't answer directly. She just turned her laptop toward Gita and hit play on a short black and white video. It showed an old television set inside a bare room. A man, face blurred, was speaking calmly, seated at a table. "If you're watching this," the man said, "then the simulation's latency has crossed its safe operating threshold. You're beginning to see the bleed." Gita leaned in, her breath catching. "The bleed. Reality's stitching is failing," the man continued. "You're watching feedback loops in real time. Shows, interviews, performances, they were never just content. There. Interface points. Controlled experiments. But the system is old. Was designed for Cold War containment. It can't handle the global emotional variance we have now." She stopped the video. This is insane," she said quietly. "You're saying we're in a live experiment?" The liaison finally responded. "No, not we. The population. The public. The system reads emotional data, runs prediction simulations, and feeds back content to reinforce stability. Until someone resists the loop hard enough." "Bradley," Gita whispered. Back in Los Angeles, Kimmel's team was under lockdown. Staff were told to sign NDAs longer than their contracts. Phones were collected, studio remained dark. One brave editor, Marcus Webb, snuck out during a fire drill and uploaded an unedited segment he'd pulled from the server back up the 10-minute original version of the Bradley Whitford interview. It hit the internet like a meteor. In the full version, Kimmel doesn't cut away. He leans forward as Bradley says, "You're not just a host, Jimmy. You're a variable controller. You don't even write your own transition jokes anymore. The algorithm does." Kimmel's face twitches. Then blurs, literally blurs for less than a second. And in that frame behind him, the digital backdrop flickers not to city lights, but to a neural map like a brain scan. And the audience, they're not clapping. They're not even moving. They're frozen like mannequins. Cut to Kimmel smirking. Nervously, joking. "You've been watching too many of your own documentaries, Brad." Bradley replies flatly, "You mean the ones the Dodd classified before they aired?" And then he stands, walks off. It's unedited, there's no clean feed cut, the screen just cracks, literally pixel by pixel. Then static. Millions watched it. Millions started asking questions. Online, new forums popped up overnight. Theories, breakdowns, coordinates, audio. One frame showed a pattern embedded in the show's opening logo. Sequence that matched a known CIA PSYOP signature from 2009. Another frame showed a document. Bradley slipped into his jacket before leaving. It's the file name visible for a split. Second, mirror_playbook_v1.3. Meanwhile, the Pentagon denied everything. The reflection blinked first. Maria Esquivel, seasoned political correspondent and occasional guest anchor on MSNBC, sat frozen in front of her dressing room mirror. But the reflection, her reflection, had moved a half second ahead of her. Just barely. Just once. Enough to rupture the illusion that she was alone. She stood up slowly, heart pounding in her chest like a warning drum. The text she received an hour earlier still hovered in her mind. Part 4 complete. The rest begins when the next host breaks script. She hadn't told anyone, she hadn't needed to. Her producer was already acting strangely more rigid than usual, his voice wrapped around every sentence like he was being watched from inside his own throat. Maria had been through wars, literal and political. She recognized fear when it dressed up in professionalism. As she made her way to the studio floor, earpiece humming gently with stage direction, she noticed a camera light blinking in an unfamiliar pattern. 2 slow flashes. 1 fast, it repeated. Morse code, maybe? No time to decode. The live segment was with a Pentagon spokesperson, soft-gloved. Explanation about military transparency in the age of misinformation. Maria had done these dances before. She knew where to smile, when to interject, when to cut for commercial. But tonight she felt the script curling at the edges. Midway through the interview, she pressed her fingertip lightly against the side of her earpiece, just enough to mute the control room, but not enough to appear suspicious. Her guest, Colonel Renner, spoke confidently about decentralized truth protocols and automated intelligence curation. Maria tilted her head. "What does automated curation actually mean, Colonel?" she asked calmly. The Colonel blinked. "Well, it's a system that helps parse disinformation from valid reporting. Based on what? Linguistic patterns? Emotional keywords? Who decides what's disinformation? Maria, these are technical systems. They're not run by people with bias. Are they run by people at all?" she asked. Her voice didn't rise, but the air in the studio changed, sharpened. The earpiece hissed. "Cut now. Break." Now go to graphic. Maria kept going. "Colonel, were you aware that a simulation leak involving broadcast control systems surfaced 3 nights ago? That it suggested certain shows this show might be part of real-time behavioral experiments." The Colonel's posture shifted. "Ms. Esquivel, you're venturing into extremely irresponsible territory." "No," she said, standing now. "I'm walking into the one place journalists were trained to go. The line." The control room yanked the feed. The broadcast froze. Viewers across the country saw a spinning MSNBC logo and then a pre-recorded weather update. But inside the studio, Maria S. mic was still live on the internal channel. She turned toward camera 2 and whispered. Bradley wasn't the first. He was just the first to be seen. At that moment, halfway across the world, Gita Lau was inside a train somewhere between Milan and Prague. Her contact had gone dark. She hadn't slept. Her laptop battery was dying, and the encrypted drive she'd received in Bologna refused to decrypt fully. She had 3 decrypted files: echo_thresholds.pdf, narrative_dampenners.mp4mk scriptloop_v12.json. The video was the shortest, only 8 seconds. It was raw satellite footage over Washington, D.C. Dated March 14, 2023. The audio was muffled, but a single word flickered in the waveform: prime wave. Gita didn't know what it meant, but it showed up again in the JSON file. A loop. A trigger sequence connected to broadcast timestamps. She ran the numbers. Every major media meltdown of the past year, unexpected rants, walkouts, technical failures, viral stunts had occurred within 5 seconds of that same time signal. 21 hours, 14 minutes, and 3 seconds GMT. A global synchronization point. A pulse. She typed rapidly. If these loops are controlling narrative reception, then someone is curating our reaction to reality. But who? And how long had it been happening? Her screen glitched. A new message appeared. Track 6, Platform B. 3 minutes. No sender. She grabbed her bag and ran. Inside a quiet bunker deep beneath Tel Aviv, 2 cybersecurity experts sat in silence. They'd just watched the unedited MSNBC segment released anonymously within minutes of its internal cutoff. One analyst finally spoke. She did it. Broke the threshold without triggering the failsafe. His partner leaned forward, and the Colonel, real but not briefed. They sat still for a moment longer. Then the screen lit up again. A new target, BBC One, Thursday segment. Royal Legacy and the Future of National Identity. A known host, a known variable, a known vulnerability. This one could tilt Europe, one of them muttered, lest they suppress it. Again, they won't. Why not? The reply came quietly, because the bleed is accelerating. By the time Kita reached Platform B, her contact was already waiting. It wasn't who she expected. It was Bradley Whitford. No cameras, no mic. He handed her a small envelope. "This is the last one," he said. "Don't open it here. When you do, you'll know if you're inside the story ... or if you've already been written out." She wanted to ask questions, but the train door hissed open and he was gone. She sat in the train car alone, staring at the envelope. Outside the window, the world looked normal, but something inside her said it wasn't. Not anymore. The envelope sat unopened on the table in front of her for nearly 6 hours. Gitalau had crossed 2 borders and 3 train lines by now, ending up in a quiet hotel room somewhere outside Krakow. No windows faced the street. No devices were connected to Wi-Fi. Her phone was powered off and hidden inside the room's mini fridge next to a sweating glass bottle of mineral water. She stared at the plain paper. No markings, no seal. Only a faint indent near the bottom corner that, under closer inspection, resembled a wave. She opened it carefully, sliding out a single memory card, plugging it into her secure offline laptop. She found one item, a password-protected video file titled retune_v3.mp4 and a small .txt file named proto p61. She opened the text file first. Asterisk, asterisk. If you're reading this, Prime Wave was never about control. It was about calibration, not of programs, of people. Asterisk, asterisk, your reactions, your attention span. Your empathy. What we learned from war simulations, we started testing on audiences. What we learned from audiences, we refined into policy. P61 is a final phase test. You're living in it. She paused, then ran a hash check on the video file. Clean, no malware, no trackers. She clicked play. It opened with static, then slowly tuned to a clip from an old late-night broadcast. Jimmy Kimmel, but not any known episode. He was wearing a slightly different suit. His guest wasn't Bradley this time. It was Senator Mike Lee, and across from him Jasmine Crockett. But this couldn't have happened. They'd never appeared together on live TV. In the video, Kimmel smiled nervously, glanced off stage, and asked, "Senator, do you believe the Constitution still has full command over new digital surveillance systems?" Lee leaned forward, clearly annoyed. "Jimmy, the Constitution doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be reread." Crockett cut in. "But who's reading it? Because the algorithms you approve don't seem to recognize any Fourth Amendment. When they're crawling through people's lives." Jimmy tried to lighten the moment. But then Crockett stood up. "You know what this is?" she said. "It's a loop, not a conversation. We're running a script." The broadcast glitched, froze, then restarted again with the same dialogue. Word for word, the same question, same smirk, same rebuttal. Again, Gitta's mouth went dry. A loop inside a broadcast. It's a manufactured argument calibrated for viewers to feel conflict, anger, and allegiance, but never action. She closed the laptop. Everything made sense now. Nothing did. Meanwhile, in Washington, Maria Esquivel was under house restriction. Officially, not an arrest. But there were 3 black SUVs outside her apartment and her MSNBC security. Badge had been deactivated. Still, she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. A young intern, whom she barely remembered from her early days at CNN, had smuggled her a flash drive. No note, just the timestamp. 21 hours, 14 minutes, and 3 seconds GMT. Prime Wave. She inserted it into her backup tablet. It was a full archive of segment metadata across 6 major networks. Each file corresponded to a live moment where public reaction deviated from predicted models. Every moment was followed by unexplained feed cuts, sudden technical difficulties, or a return to scripted comedy. The media wasn't lying. They were being tuned. And now, something or someone had removed the dampeners. The loops weren't stabilizing anymore. The calibration was failing. She opened a private video line to Gita. When the connection stabilized, both women stared at each other across the screen. "No encryption?" Gita asked, surprised. "Does it matter anymore?" Maria replied. "They know. We know. The only thing left is who moves first." Gita exhaled. "I found a broadcast that never happened." Maria nodded. "I found ones that did. Too many times." They sat in silence for a moment. "Do you think Bradley's still alive?" Gita finally asked. Maria looked away. It's not the question anymore. Then what is? Whether any of us ever were. At the same time, in a deep intelligence archive in Virginia, two analysts were pulling old footage to trace metadata spikes. Why is there a timestamp fluctuation exactly at 21 hours, 14 minutes, and 3 seconds across every network? It began as a whisper, buried between international stock updates and a breaking weather alert. A 17-second clip of Bradley Whitford's final words reappeared on an obscure Chilean newsfeed, translated into Spanish with no attribution. For hours, the same clip surfaced on Russian telegram channels. But this time re-edited to include a CIA watermark that didn't exist in the original. By morning, it had aired in 23 countries in 23 different forms, some as a warning, some as propaganda, some as parody. But none of them were the original. Because the original, the unedited, unlooped version, had never aired at all. And that was the point. Kita Lau stood outside the old Interfax building in Vienna, the wind flaring through the alleyways like old paper. She'd just come from a secure meeting, one that hadn't been logged, scheduled, or acknowledged. Across from her, Maria. Esquivel lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "You still think people will care?" Gita asked. "I don't need them to care," Maria said. "I need them to remember." Remember what? That we were meant to forget. Gita unzipped her bag and handed her a drive. It's all there. Proof of Project Primewave. The simulations, the loops. The manipulated audience emotion curves. Even the original Bradley feed Maria took it silent. There's more. Kita added, Jimmy Kimmel's show wasn't the only one. There were others. Late night, daytime news, even reality shows. They tested people's moral patience in tiny doses. Reaction timing. Outrage fatigue. Maria stared off at the street. "The more we watched," she murmured, "the less we saw." In Geneva, a special session was called at the UN. For the first time in history, world leaders weren't debating war, trade, or climate. They were debating narrative rights. The leaked Primewave archive had made its way into the hands of 4 different intelligence alliances. Each blamed the other for its creation. But it didn't matter who built it anymore. What mattered was how many governments had used it. The floor was opened. Ambassadors from 5 continents rose and detailed moments when their own citizens had unknowingly participated in emotional simulation tests broadcast live, manipulated in real time, and later memory-holed by technical errors or algorithmic filtering. A proposal emerged, the global narrative. Integrity Act. It would ban any state or private entity from intentionally altering audience reactions through feedback algorithms or predictive sentiment targeting without disclosure. It would be enforced if passed by international media observers, satellite-fed verification systems, and a blockchain-style archive of all live segments. For a moment, it seemed the world might actually reclaim its sense of narrative truth, till the screens in the chamber went black. Back in Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel stood alone on an empty soundstage. He hadn't been seen for weeks. Rumors swirled that he'd gone into hiding, or was under federal gag orders, or had been part of the test himself from the beginning. Tonight, the cameras were off, but he spoke anyway, to the walls, to the ghost of a crowd, maybe to himself. "I didn't know what was real," he said softly. Bradley, ... He didn't storm off because of me. He stormed off because he saw it coming. He looked at the old teleprompter, still frozen on a script that had never aired. Introduce Bradley, joke about his beard, ask about the Dakasauries, smile, deflect, reset. I thought I was helping. People laugh, but I was teaching them to forget, to cycle through outrage and land back at apathy. He reached for a dusty remote, pressed play. On the monitor, a loop began again. Bradley, sitting, smiling. "Then, you're in the script, Jimmy. We all are." Jimmy stared, then unplugged the feed. Gita and Maria published the full archive the following week. It dropped simultaneously in over 100 languages on a decentralized mirrored network. There was no server to shut down, no company to sue, no face to threaten. Within hours, independent journalists began cross-referencing events. People remembered things they weren't supposed to, debates that had looped, interviews that glitched, news that vanished. Online forums exploded. Was our grief prompted? Was my opinion ever mine? Did they shape how we mourned? But the most common post was a question. What else was scripted? And then silence. For 3 weeks, no major network aired live interviews. Every broadcast was double verified. News anchors stared directly into cameras, unsure of what they could say. Governments released conflicting statements. Hollywood paused production on a dozen talk shows. AI detection tools were uploaded publicly. Millions began running them on old segments, hunting for signs of emotional loops, forced arguments, and fabricated consensus. And everywhere, Bradley's voice returned, sometimes in full, sometimes spliced, rescored, or remixed, with protest music. But the line that refused to die was always the same. This segment was never meant to air. It had become a war cry, confession, a key, and it broke the illusion. In the final moments of the story, a small girl in Ghana, watching, on a solar-powered tablet, turned to her older brother and asked, "Did we ever decide what we believe?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because for the first time in his life, he realized he could decide it all. And far away on a quiet server in Iceland, a new live feed began, unscripted, uncut, unlooped. The world was watching. For real. This time.